Ukraine isn't the only country standing up to Russia. Moldova too is stepping up to the plate. Eager to reclaim its full sovereignty and independence, its government is taking major steps towards taking the Transnistria region, which has long been seen as a puppet state of the Putin regime, out of the Kremlin's hands and back into Moldovan control. To understand what's happening and how the situation might evolve from here, it's important to first step back and look at the bigger picture, exploring how and why Transnistria split from the rest of Moldova to begin with. Transnistria, also known as the Pridnestrovian Moldavian Republic (PMR), is a narrow patch of land that sits between the Dniester River and the Moldova-Ukraine border. It covers 1,600 square miles or 4,163 square kilometers of land and is home to around 367,000 people. And most of the world officially regards it as part of Moldova. But that doesn't quite tell the full story, because Transnistria does not, at all, operate like a regular region of Moldova. It has its own separate currency, capital, and even its own national anthem. It also operates its own government, parliament, police force, postal system, and military. This all began decades ago when the Soviet Union started to collapse in the late 1980s and early 1990s. At the time, Moldova, which was a Soviet republic, was experiencing a surge of nationalist politics, which led to a strong movement oriented around promoting the Romanian language and fostering stronger ties with neighboring Romania. Many of the Russian and Ukrainian-speaking Moldovans living east of the Dniester River, however, fear that this might go too far, potentially leading to some sort of unification between Romania and Moldova that would leave those people feeling marginalized and isolated in their own homeland. Tensions began to bubble up, and Soviet-aligned officials stepped in to announce the formation of the PMR in 1990, just before Moldova formally departed the USSR. A brief war, the Transnistrian War, erupted soon after that, pitting pro-PMR forces like the Transnistrian Republic Guard, militia, and Neo-Cossack units against pro-Moldovan forces, including the Moldovan military and police force. Russia intervened, siding with the separatists and deploying its 14th Army to reinforce their ranks. Their involvement effectively prevented Moldova's forces from regaining control of the region, and Russia also played an integral role in negotiating a ceasefire in 1992. That ceasefire has held, but the status of Transnistria has remained unclear ever since. In the intervening years, it's operated outside of Moldova's authority, functioning like a small independent state despite being heavily reliant on Russia and not formally recognized by the international community. From the Kremlin's perspective, Transnistria is a valuable asset and one that Russia is eager to keep hold of. Moscow maintains a sizable force of up to 1,500 peacekeeper troops on the ground in Transnistria at any one time, while also boasting its own military base in the region, as well as an extensive ammunition dump. Moldova, meanwhile, has repeatedly called for the withdrawal of Russia's soldiers from the territory, but numerous rounds of long-running talks have failed to yield any tangible results. And it's not just a question of troops. Russia also provides political and financial backing to this breakaway territory, which it also uses as a kind of strategic foothold to exert political, military, and economic pressure over Moldova itself, preventing the country's integration into important alliances like NATO and the European Union. In other words, Moscow leverages its presence in Transnistria as a way to indirectly control Moldova's fate. For years, there's also been a prevailing fear in Moldova and beyond that Russia's President Vladimir Putin could attempt to orchestrate a Ukraine-style invasion of the country, using Transnistria as a springboard for such an attack. Putin might even attempt a repeat of the same playbook he used in Ukraine. There, in the early days of the invasion, he claimed that his special military operation was necessary to denazify the nation and save ethnic Russians in Ukraine's eastern regions, like Donetsk and Luhansk, from persecution and even a possible genocide. He could make up a similar story in regard to Moldova, claiming that the country's pro-European government poses some sort of existential threat to the people of the PMR, and arguing that the only option is to send in Russian troops and establish some sort of security buffer along the Transnistrian border. Indeed, Moldovan officials have been sounding the alarms about such a scenario for quite some time. In April of 2025, for example, Former Moldovan intelligence head Yuri Brichag called Russia's military presence in the region a very real threat to both Moldovan security and European stability, adding that the Kremlin's war machine could feasibly force its way through Ukrainian territory and march on the Moldovan capital. If, God forbid, the Russians succeed in breaking through and bypassing Odessa, they could enter Transnistria, and from there they could reach Chisinau in days. This is just one of the many reasons why Moldovan officials are so eager to oust Russia from the region once and for all. And their moment may have arrived at last. Here's why. Before the war with Ukraine began, there was little hope of any sort of reunification between Moldova and Transnistria. The region enjoyed strong support from Russia, most notably receiving free natural gas for more than 30 years. That gas fueled Transnistrian businesses, heated people's homes, and propped up the area's economy. It also powered much of the rest of Moldova, since the country's biggest power station, the Kurchurgan power station, is situated within the PMR's borders. At the start of 2025, however, everything changed. A 5-year deal between Russia's Gazprom and Ukraine's Naftogaz expired, plunging the PMR into an unprecedented energy crisis. Overnight, the population suddenly found themselves without heating or hot water. Energy tariffs skyrocketed, and some smaller settlements and villages were completely cut off from the essential energy they needed to survive. The whole of Moldova was affected by this, but it was the Transnistrian people who felt the biggest impact, struggling with repeated rolling blackouts and icy cold homes on a regular basis. Moscow scrambled for a solution, while the European Parliament stepped in with a $1.9 billion support package to help Moldova manage the crisis. Transnistria, however, has continued to suffer. Throughout 2025, its economy contracted by a whopping 18%. Industrial production fell 30%, while inflation rose to a staggering 15%. The region's per capita GDP for the year sat at a lowly €4,150, far below the €7,250 average for the rest of Moldova. As a result of Ukraine blocking the once steady stream of gas and other supplies from Russia through its territory and into Transnistria, the PMR has been forced to look westward, turning to the European Union for support and stability during its ongoing economic state of emergency. And its energy crisis got even worse early in 2026, when the war in Iran broke out, forcing Tiraspol authorities to take drastic actions. In early March, for example, the Transnistrian government disconnected all gas-powered enterprises, heating and hot water only being provided to local households, and the Kurchurgan thermoelectric power plant has been forced to become coal-only, as it no longer receives the gas it needs to operate at pre-2025 levels. In short, the entire region is arguably in the weakest position it's ever been. And with Russia having to cope with its own crises, like the fact that it's now suffered more than 1.25 million casualties and its own economy teeters on the brink of complete collapse, the PMR cannot rely on Moscow magically swooping in to save it anytime soon. Moldovan officials evidently understand all this. Indeed, as the country's deputy prime minister, Valeriu Chiver, puts it, this is a completely different situation from what we had at the start of the full-scale war in Ukraine in 2022, and even more so from previous years. The evolution of the situation in the Transnistrian region from an economic and social point of view is today completely dependent on Chisinau, including the fact that the Transnistrian region has practically become an island between Ukraine and the Republic of Moldova. Now, sensing a potentially unprecedented and invaluable opportunity that they don't want to miss, the Moldovan government has started to close in on the region and even organised a historic and potentially game-changing meeting with Transnistrian representatives, which took place on February 26. But before we take a closer look at how that meeting unfolded and what it might mean for Moldova's future, this is why we make the military show, to explain how power really moves. If you're new here, hit subscribe so you don't miss what's next. The February meeting, which was the first between representatives from the two sides in almost a year, took place in the Transnistrian capital of Tiraspol, and the Deputy Prime Minister wasted no time in making his position clear, opening the meeting with a simple but meaningful remark to remind the PMR and the wider world of who the city rightfully belongs to. Hello everyone, we're glad to be in Tiraspol, Republic of Moldova. Moldovan journalists were also in attendance at the event, despite not normally being allowed into the region. During the meeting, Kiev called for respect for human rights in the region, free access for journalists, and a shift towards teaching in the Romanian language rather than Russian in local schools. Announcing its government's long-term goals, Kiev stated, "Our clear objective is the reintegration of the Dniester left bank region into the legal, economic, financial, social, and food space of Moldova." He went on to note that thousands of people in the area already commute across the Dniester River to work in other Moldovan regions, and many also travel across the country for education and medical care too. In essence, he was saying that the reintegration process is already underway, and it wouldn't necessarily take all that much for the PMR to return to the Moldovan fold entirely. His Transnistrian counterpart, Vitaly Ignatieff, the head of the PMR's foreign ministry, who also happens to be a wanted man in Ukraine due to his associations with Moscow, felt that the talks between the two sides were a good sign of things to come, while urging for a clear focus on the needs of the people while avoiding what he called politicization. With the PMR's separatist leaders effectively being backed into a corner and running rapidly out of room, analysts like Andrei Cururaru feel that now is the time for Moldova to take action and reintegrate the breakaway region. These demands won't be met right away, but we see Chisinau taking the lead. Until now, Chisinau has mostly reacted while Tiraspol set the agenda, and talks have focused on technical and economic issues rather than political ones. Now, it's clear that Chisinau's leaders know what they want for the Transnistrian region. Fellow analyst Jon Tabata agrees, noting that Moldova at last has the upper hand in negotiations with the region. Transnistria now depends completely on Chisinau, and the authorities should use all the advantages they have. Chisinau's main goal is to prevent a humanitarian crisis, avoid making things worse, and keep the reintegration process peaceful. For now, all the signs suggest that Moldova is eager to grasp this once-in-a-lifetime chance at reintegration and do everything in its power to achieve it. Indeed, mere days before Kiev visited Tiraspol, the Moldovan president, Maia Sandu, signed a decree to strip citizenship from 9 members of the separatist administration. It was the clearest sign yet that Chisinau is ready to crack down on the breakaway regime. Explaining the decision, the presidency said that 2 of those targeted fought on the side of the separatists in the 1992 Dniester War, adding that all 9 were involved in particularly serious acts that harmed the interests of Moldova. Stanislav Secariu, a Moldovan national security advisor, shed further light on the situation, explaining, "These acts were committed in the interests of a foreign state that violates the neutrality of our country and is waging a war of aggression against the neighboring state of Ukraine. The withdrawal of citizenship is a measure provided for by law, applied in cases where the fundamental interests of Moldova are affected." The PMR hasn't responded too kindly, with Ignatieff calling the citizenship annulments a destructive act. "We're seeing pressure on Transnistrians, on specific individuals, and on Transnistria as a whole. We consider such actions destructive." But Moldovan officials are no longer willing to bow down and abide by the PMR's agenda. They're ready to retake what's theirs, ousting the Russians and reunifying their land at last. It's a noble goal, but one that won't necessarily be all that easy to achieve. Even with Russia and Transnistria in a relatively weak moment, there are still several challenges for Chisinau to overcome. The first is related to cost. Moldova is one of the poorest states in all of Europe. If it wants to reintegrate Transnistria, it will somehow need to cover the cost of the process. For example, given that Transnistria is home to around 367,000 people, most of those individuals will have to be added to the Moldovan pension system. The regime also has its own security force, made up of around 15,000 people. They too will need to be retrained and integrated into Moldova's own defense and security institutions, a process which is not only expensive but risky too. All in all, experts estimate that full reintegration could cost anywhere from 500 million euros up to €1 billion per year for the first 3 years. Fortunately, plans are already in place to raise the required funds. The Deputy PM recently announced the formation of a convergence fund, which should help to cover the diverse cost of reunification with Transnistria. The government will use taxes and customs exemptions to increase this fund over time. A group of deputies from Moldova's ruling Action and Solidarity Party has also submitted draft legislation to ensure that all businesses throughout the country will be treated equally and fairly throughout the reintegration process. On top of this, Moldovan authorities have also sought to improve living standards on the opposite side of the Dniester River to Transnistria, essentially showing the people of the PMR how much better their lives could be if they reintegrated. As the region grows poorer and slips ever further into its energy crisis, its people are starting to see that the grass really might be greener on the other side after all. Tens of thousands of them are already commuting over the river each day to work at Moldovan companies, and that number has risen in recent times, as Cururaru confirms. The number of people from the Transnistrian region working in Chisinau has clearly increased. We also see that salaries and prices in Transnistria have changed, lowering the quality of life there. And the disparity in living standards between Transnistria and the rest of Moldova is only going to increase in the future if the region refuses reintegration. Moldova has announced plans to double its minimum wage by 2030, for example. This benefit will only apply to Transnistria if it agrees to become part of Moldova. But with Moldova looking set to become stronger and more prosperous in the years ahead, especially as it eases away from Russia and strengthens its connections with Europe and the rest of the Western world, the decision looks like an increasingly obvious and easy one for the PMR's people to make. There's just one final obstacle standing in the way of a peaceful reintegration process: Russia. While the people of Transnistria and even its separatist leaders may eventually agree to rejoin Moldova, the Kremlin is unlikely to acquiesce quite as easily. It's evident that Moscow wants to maintain its influence and control over the region, as shown by the constant year-round presence of Russian troops in Transnistria since the separatist war of 1992. Russia also owns an enormous ammunition depot close to the Transnistrian village of Kolbazna. It's one of the largest munition stockpiles in all of Eastern Europe, and it's situated barely a mile away from the Ukrainian border. Expert estimates state that there are around 20,000 tons of old Soviet supplies inside, and most likely some larger pieces of military equipment as well. While a lot of the munitions inside are decades old, with some even dating back to the Second World War, Russia still wouldn't want to simply give up those supplies. Numerous analysts agree, with Tabata stating that Russia is highly unlikely to bring its troops home voluntarily. The problem, however, is that even though there's only a relatively small amount of Russian troops in the region, anywhere from 1,500 to 3,000 according to various sources, Moldova wouldn't want to oust them by force. It doesn't have a large army, with only 5,000 active duty personnel and 58,000 more in reserve, nor does Moldova have any tanks or other operational assets of note. It's simply nowhere near strong enough to go toe-to-toe with even a small Russian force in the same way that Ukraine has. Plus, Chisinau wouldn't want to give Putin any excuse to send more of his armed forces to Moldovan soil. Instead, it will have to rely on diplomacy, as well as aid from its European allies like its close neighbour Romania, to slowly but surely pile pressure on the Kremlin. If it can keep on stirring up support among the Transnistrian people for full reintegration, it will already be one step closer to acquiring true independence and freeing itself from the Kremlin's control once and for all. Now, you can learn more about how Putin's long-term plans for Moldova have completely crumbled around him in this video, which explores how this small Eastern European nation is standing up to the biggest bully on earth and fighting for its future like never before. Alternatively, check out this video to see how Ukraine is piling the pressure onto Russia, using 3 key strategic shifts to strengthen its position while piling pressure on the Kremlin. And finally, remember to subscribe to our channel too, for more breaking news and insightful analysis of conflicts and geopolitical situations around the world.